Today on Fresh Vintage, we have our 2003 Honda Pilot here, and it has a ripped CV boot on the passenger front side. So we're going to go ahead and get that replaced. Let's get started right now. So kicking things off here, we always like to show you the tools that we use to work on the vehicle start to finish. Kicking things off, we have a Sunex tool. This is an impact half-inch drive. You also see we have a half-inch drive impact. You don't necessarily need this, but it saves your body a lot of physical work and just, getting stuff torqued and broke free and then tightened back down. We also have a 22 millimeter along with a 22 millimeter here. These are for the actual strut bolts. 17 millimeter and 17 millimeter here. These are for the actual caliper bolts. And you also have a brake line bolt holding the actual brake line, so you have to take that off. That's a 12 millimeter. And then the axle socket, the nut itself, this is 36 millimeter. You can rent these. You can also buy one at any of your local Advance Auto Parts. For the actual CV axle itself, you could say you could tap the actual axle out, but we had to head it. We had to hammer it a little bit, so a good solid hammer. And this bar here, we don't have a half-inch actual ratchet out here, but you could have one if you wanted. We use this because we had the breaker bar. It's really nice to have. You shouldn't need a C-clamp, but you'll see why we needed a C-clamp in the video here. And then we have a Phillips and a flat blade. You don't necessarily need a Phillips, but we showed it in the video lining up the actual strut bolt holes. You'll see it later in the video. And then this here was to use to make the indentation on the actual axle nut. This is a torque stick for 80 foot-pounds for the actual lug nuts. And with that, let's get started. We'll take the wheel off right now. So to kick things off here, I have the front end of the Pilot jacked up, and I have the actual jack stand sitting here. This is moving, so I'm just going to pop the lug nuts off and then get the tire off of the Pilot, and then lower this down so that it's sitting and resting on the jack stand and the actual jack. Quick mention, we're going to use our Javelin here. If you haven't ever heard of our other channel, Fresh Vintage Garage, we have this and two other contestants in our impact video. A really cool video where we beat the heck out of these things so you can spend your hard-earned money wiser and smartly. Definitely check that video out. It's amazing how much abuse these things will take. But with that, let me pop these off of here right now. So the first order of business here is we have the axle here, and this is a 36 millimeter nut. So let me grab our 36 millimeter socket, and we're going to go ahead and take that off of here. So we have our Powerbilt kit, has a bunch of different sockets for situations just like this, and great little tool to have. Or you can just go buy a 36 millimeter socket if you need it. Any Advance Auto Parts in your area will have one in stock. If you use one of these, make sure you flip it with the picture down. Otherwise, your sockets are going to fall all over the place. We'll grab our 36 millimeter here. And I wanted to show you, if you are doing this on your own Pilot, there is supposed to be an indent right here where someone maybe have taken like a flat blade screwdriver and a hammer and actually pounded that in to keep this nut from rotating. And in this case, whoever did this, I'm guessing this axle has been replaced once, but that's not been done here. So I guess we don't have to worry about that, but you may find yourself in a situation where you need to bend that out to actually get this loose so you can get this nut off of the axle. But I'm going to put this on our impact here. So I had to resort to this, I believe it's a 2-foot, 18-inch, half-inch breaker bar, and I did break this loose. So I'll finish getting this off of here with the impact. There we go. Now while we're here, something you want to do is make sure after you break this loose that you give this a hit. And there are kits you can buy that will actually thread on with the lug nuts to push this back in. I would recommend if you have a hammer like this. If not, then this is a straight up metal hammer. Just tapping on this. Your ultimate goal here is to get this to where you can actually pull this out. But that's great to see. So next steps, we're going to work on getting the caliper out of the way. And then we're going to disconnect the brake line here from the actual strut assembly. So we're going to do those two things next. So a quick note, we turned the wheels. We actually started the car, and I would say do not do this. Definitely do this before you actually start any of this. Turn your wheels. But we turned the wheels, as you can see, just to get a little bit better access. We have a 12 millimeter here, and because we have the impacts out, we already have the impact here. I'm just going to do this. You probably want to do this with a wrench, and we'll definitely put this back on with a wrench. There we go. And what we're doing is we're just getting the actual brake caliper out of the way so that we can have a little bit more room to work here. Now there's two bolts that you need to get onto and actually get the caliper, the entire caliper out of the way. The ones you're chasing, the bolt is right there. And then there's a second one right down here. It's kind of hard to see. We're going to go ahead and break these loose. Let's do that right now. And then we have a caliper hanger. It's basically just a big glorified S-hook, but this allows you to go into the actual strut and hold the caliper there so it's not dangling by the brake line and potentially messing up the brake line. Now, keep in mind this entire thing, brake pads and all, is coming off. And we're going to do this. And I'm going to hang this right here, right on the strut, the spring, the coil spring. And now our brake line is kind of just chilling there. Everything's happy. So we have a lot more room. And you can see how much room we have to work with here. So we have a 22 millimeter wrench and a 22 millimeter impact. And I'm going to start, I want to see if I can get the nut off of here. So I'm going to put this on the bolt head side and then the impact on the nut side. There's that one. And let's go to the bottom one here. Okay, I guess it needed a little back and forth there, but there's that. Which probably means the bottom one is going to be the hardest part. So I'm going to wiggle this, and I'm hoping that as I hit this with the impact gun, wiggling this will get it to drive itself out. There's that. Okay. There we go. So both of those are out. So we have the CV axle ready to come out. I'm just going to come in here like this, and I'm going to give this a little bit of push up this way. There we go. And this is going to be, if you've never done this before, this is your number one hardest part as my light falls out of the strut there. That is your number one hardest part, is getting the snout, so to speak, the actual splines out of the hub. So the fact that you just did that, congratulations, like seriously, because that is probably one of the hardest parts of the entire job. And the moment of truth and glory, there we go. So we're going to actually show you how we got that loose, because that was not easy. So let me show you the theory behind how we actually did this. And I say the theory because at one point I was laying under the pilot sideways, kind of like doing one of these things, and that came out maybe like a quarter inch, half inch at a time, but it did come out. And I had this honestly between the exhaust and the end of this. So I was kind of in there like this, and I managed to get it wedged in there, and then I just started going to town. And if you're doing this on jack stands, it's going to be your number one hardest part. The good news is we got it out. It did not defeat us. So let's get the new one out of the box, and we're going to show you, compare it side by side to make sure we have the right one. So new half shaft, old half shaft. If you've literally never done this before in your life and you're not familiar with, half shafts, seeing any kind of crack like that, that's bad. You can see it starting over here. Like if it was this, I'd be like, okay, we got to change it soon. If you see that, you're like, yeah, put it on the calendar for the next 90 days. And obviously this is where it's like, you better do it, ASAP, because your grease is flying everywhere under that wheel well. Hence, that's why I'm so filthy. And your metal in here is running out of grease. So eventually you get to the point where you're metal on metal, and that's where this axle disintegrates. You can see how loose this is. These should not be that loose. And you pick up the new one, and I have to work. You can tell the bearings in there are actually a lot more tight, a lot more solid. So we're just looking at them. The ends look the same spline count. They both look the same diameter, same shape. So we're good. So we're gonna go ahead and get this guy installed. Let's do that right now. So we have some grease on the inside of our new axle here. So a quick update here. This one on, you have to have that. Just have some patience because it pretty much had to be like perfectly aligned. And now that it's on there, it's almost like pressed fit on there. Like I'm sure I could hammer it back off of there, but it is locked in. So the good news is we're on the home stretch because I have the axle nut I'm pulling off right now. So we have our axle nut here. I'm just gonna bend this. You may have to give it a little bit more effort because that old axle was pretty wore out. But work on rotating. Don't get grease all over the rotor there, but rotate this so that you can get those splines to mesh. There's that. And we don't have to do anything super tight here. I'm just gonna put that on. And let's get the light out of here and then we'll work on putting the strut back together. So we have the strut almost lined up, and this is where having a screwdriver comes in so handy because you can kind of give it little finite adjustments, I should say. Just work that bolt in just like that. And then let's see if I can give this a little shove. So we have both bolts back into the strut and hub mount here, and you'll see there's a C-clamp on here, and I will preface this by saying you shouldn't have to do this. Like, I've never personally had a hub to strut connection like this be this difficult, but we had to get a C-clamp and actually crank this down to bring that into alignment in the check. So take that with a grain of salt. You shouldn't have to do this, but we had to do this. But the good news is these are back on here, and we'll crank these down and we'll put the torque spec on the screen so that you know how much foot-pounds to crank these down to. So now that we have the strut back together, I'm gonna go ahead and grab our caliper, and we'll put the torque spec for these on the screen here as well. We'll get these cranked down. So you can see we have pretty much everything back together, and you also see we turn the wheels straight. So don't do that. Leave your wheels in one spot. Don't do what we did in the video. But we did that for convenience so that we could get that extra angle on the front part of the axle here. But everything's back together and tight and torqued to spec. And I did want to mention this here. We did put this back in. This is a 12 millimeter, if memory serves correct. And we torqued that down. But the one thing we want to do is we want to get this down to torque spec. And I think that this axle, the snout of that, so to speak, is all the way in the hub already. But I want to make sure, and so what I'm going to do is use this guy and crank this down, and then we'll do a final torque. We'll torque it to spec, and we'll put that on the screen. So I'm going to say that is in as far as it's going to come because it would be moving back and forth if you had any slop. But being that that turned maybe a quarter turn on the socket, we should be tight enough. So we'll torque that down to spec. And then the one thing you want to do that the person before us never did is get an actual flat blade screwdriver and then just indent this so that this nut doesn't actually try to back off while you're driving the car or putting it in reverse and drive and so on. So just wanted to point out we did make that indentation there, so don't forget, like we actually almost just forgot to do that. We're just going to put the wheel on, torque down to 80 foot-pounds on a Honda Pilot here. And just like that, folks, you fixed your own car, you saved the money, you've done it yourself, you have the satisfaction knowing you took care of your own vehicle and kept it on the road. We appreciate you watching. If you like classic cars, if you like muscle cars, if you like keeping your cars certified fresh finish your channel, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.